It's probably not a good idea for someone called Jill, as I am, to call their son Jack, but I admit I seriously considered it, not only because I liked the name, which I did, but because of a very much loved and talked about great-uncle who went by that name and who died before I was born. Jack was, by all accounts, a delightful man, bursting with fun and good humour. He was also a gifted engineer and joined the Territorial Army in that capacity before the Second World War. Unfortunately, this meant he was quickly called up at the outbreak of war into the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. He survived Dunkirk, but was posted to Hong Kong, where he died when Hong Kong fell at Christmas 1941. Our family still have one of Jack's letters from Hong Kong, written on the 7th of November 1941 to his sister Winnie. What a culture shock it seems to have been to him in those pre-TV days, and how uncomfortable he was in the heat. He writes, "This place is all right if you like this sort of life. I may have been sent to a much worse place, but I shall never be happy until I'm back home once again." He finds it hard to believe he is so far from home, and most of all, there is his strong desire for it all to be over so that he can return to his wife and small son. He says, "I've just been going through my old letters and photos of Millie and Michael. It brings back all the old memories. It's hard for me to believe that I'm such a long way away from them. How I wish it would soon all end." This gentle, peace-loving and indomitably cheerful man's life ended less than 2 months later in the 18-day siege and battle to defend Hong Kong. How distressing Jack's last few days must have been, as Churchill repeatedly refused to allow surrender, even though it was a lost cause. For years, all the family knew was that he was last seen defending a ridge. This was hard to imagine, especially as, strictly speaking, he was a non-combatant. Only decades later did we suspect that this wasn't a ridge, but the ridge, mentioned in some accounts, where, in the worst massacre of POWs of the battle, the Japanese killed at least 47 men, including 19 men of the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. His letter arrived home after he had died. My husband Andrew and I have visited Hong Kong twice, first in 1997 to visit his brother Tim, who was living there, and then a few years later when my brother lived there. Tim and his wife Claire were great hosts and made sure we saw all the sights. But the extra thing I wanted to do whilst we were there was to visit Uncle Jack's grave. A friend of Tim and Claire's hired a motorbike and, with Claire riding pillion, travelled round the island to research Hong Kong's war graves for us before we arrived. I also contacted the War Graves Commission, who sent information on the conflict and the cemetery, and a picture of the grave itself. My great-uncle Jack was buried at Sai Wan War Cemetery. It contains over 1,500 graves, so when we arrived and saw row after row of gravestones, we were glad of Claire's recce and directions so we could find Jack's grave straight away. How very moving it was when we stood in front of his grave. We were very aware, standing there, that we were the first members of the family to visit after an incredible 56-year wait. And he never did guess what he said he wanted most in his letter. He never did go home.